Hey beautiful people, thank you for tuning in to History with Chemistry, and we're going to be talking about racism in the North, specifically Ohio. If you're new here, go ahead and give me a follow, subscribe to my channel, also click the link tree in the description to follow me on my socials. I have already done New York. We're going to go through the northern states as it is. If you haven't seen any videos in this segment or series, I'm going to go through the racism that is in the North, because when you think about racism in America, you only think about the South really, and you don't really think about exactly where that racism was deeply rooted, and how far it stretched, which is as far north as Canada, including Canada, and as far west as California. But right now we're going to be talking about Ohio. Let's just stick to the program. Now, along with most Midwestern and Northern states, Ohio saw an influx of Black people after the Great Migration, during the Great Migration, and also after the Second World War. Primarily because Black people just needed a better life than what the South was willing to offer them. If you think 1950s, 40s, 30s in the South, that was not anything you would even want to live in. So I don't blame the Black people for wanting a better life for them and their family and descendants. But Ohio was not nearly as welcoming as they should have been to the Black citizens that were migrating north. If you can imagine, Ohio was primarily white, and although the North was against slavery, everybody wasn't. And I mentioned slavery because slavery is deeply rooted in racism. And if you were already pro-slavery, if you were okay with being a slaveholding state, you already have that mindset that Black people are not good enough to be equals to you, let alone live in your communities. So these Black people were met with a tremendous amount of racism. Now, although I won't exhaust myself with trying to fit every single racist encounter and event and tactic used in Ohio in this video, I will go through a couple of specific things, and one of those things being redlining. Now, to explain what redlining is basically where, imagine you have a map of Ohio. Ohio has a lot of different cities and a lot of different neighborhoods. Imagine you draw a red line around neighborhoods that are primarily Black. Now, imagine you do that as a racist white person. That is what redlining is. Now, a lot of time the real estate industry used redlining. They were the ones that primarily used it, but it wasn't only the real estate industry. This red line could also tell you to charge more for your services or charge more for your goods, to not purchase homes here, to not help people from here, don't give these people loans. There was a lot of different aspects and different ways that redlining affected the Black community beyond the real estate industry. And when you look into history, you'll find that the real estate industry definitely had a large hand, and they actually were the most effective because they are the reason we have poor living conditions in primarily Black areas in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Akron. So we're going to talk about that redlining. But before we get into that, I do want to mention Ohio saw a resurgence of the women's KKK. And I mentioned on my TikTok, I said the wrong date. It was not 1955, it was 1925. But it was the women's KKK. And that was white women in Ohio trying to combat the diversification of their city, by having this parade and just being completely brutal and hateful toward their new Black neighbors. Now, this was sort of effective. Now, this did scare a few Black families out, but Black people, we built to fight, and we ain't scared of none of that shit. So, of course, this resurgence of the KKK didn't scare Black people out. Then we went into redlining. Now, during this time, to discriminate against Black people was illegal, right? You can't not give Black people loans just because they're Black. You can't not give Black people certain things just because they're Black. But what you can do is create covenants with private relationships between government officials, like city officials, and different markets and different industries. We're going to be talking about the real estate industry. Now, the real estate industry and these city officials, they created something that you can't get around, something that you also can't prove. Now, if you can imagine, the city officials were not fond of Black people, the real estate companies were not fond of Black people, so they found the perfect way to redline these Black people. We're going to put them in these corners, put them in these hoods, and keep them there. We are not going to give them funding. We are not going to approve them of loans. We are not going to do anything to help them advance as a community, keep them exactly where they are. And that is exactly what they did. Now, of course, redlining affected Black people's ability to get approved for home loans, but it also created a wealth gap. I'm going to insert a map here. Now, this left map is actually going to be the red line map, where there is a a large red area, that is the primarily black areas. Now, on this map, where you see the primarily like white areas, like the brighter areas, that is where the median household income is less than $20,000. Now, we can't deny that there is a direct link here, something that can no longer be denied. Now, the real estate industry definitely had a lot to do when it came to the racist history of Ohio. For instance, today's National Association of Realtors was called the National Association of Real Estate Boards. And I just want to actually read a few things that was in the textbooks back in the day. Quote, the purchase of property by certain racial groups is very likely to diminish the property value. That is by the National Association of Real Estate Boards, 1922. That's in their training books. In order to be a real estate agent, this is what they're teaching you. Another way that redlining in the real estate industry was used is they began giving cities grades. Now, these grades came in effect and were useful when you were interested in buying either commercial or residential property. When it comes to residential property, you didn't want to be in an area that had a low grade, so D grade. And I'll insert a picture up here. I'll actually back up a little bit. Now, if you can imagine, the lowest grade areas were primarily black. And D grade or fourth grade, whatever they were called, would be considered hazardous and sometimes inhabitable. Now, if you can imagine what characteristics and values they went based off of in order to get these grades, they were primarily demographic and mostly the types of conditions, whether or not the roads were paved or how many grocery stores were nearby, and then it went into crime rates, which was typically inflated. Now, although this isn't the end and it isn't all of Ohio's racist history, for instance, in 2014, John Crawford III was murdered after purchasing a gun, air assault rifle, in Walmart, carrying it from the shelves. So Ohio's racist history, along with the surplus of Confederate flags you'll see driving through and the amount of sundown towns that are still in Ohio and active today, it obviously has not diminished. So it is important to know racism was not only in the South, it was also in the North. That is the end of Ohio's section. I understand if I missed a lot, if I didn't mention a lot. This was not to tell you the entire history of Ohio, okay? I promise you. I need you to do your own research. But in between time, go ahead, subscribe, tap the link in my link tree, give me a follow on my socials. In the meantime, love ya, and thank you for watching.